The year is 1953. Federal agents from the United States Department of Justice are boarding a tanker called the Lake George in the port of Wilmington, Delaware. They have paperwork, they have authority, and they have a list, 17 ships in total, all of them flagged for seizure. The man who owns them is not on the dock. He is thousands of miles away, in Europe, living on a yacht the size of a small naval vessel, surrounded by opera singers and heads of state. His name is Aristotle Onassis, and in Washington, very powerful people want to destroy him. What had this man done? He had outmaneuvered the United States government on a Saudi oil deal so audacious that it made the CIA nervous. He had registered his ships through shell companies and legal structures so labyrinthine that no one could quite prove what was his and what was not. He had risen from a refugee camp in Greece, a stateless teenager with a Nansen passport and $60 in his pocket, to become one of the wealthiest men on the planet. And now, the full weight of American legal power was coming down on him. This is the story of how that happened. How a boy who lost everything in a burning city on the coast of Turkey rebuilt himself from nothing, not once, but twice. How he understood something about the world that almost no one else did. That the ocean is not a barrier, it is a highway. And whoever controls the ships that move across it, controls the world's blood supply. This is the story of Aristotle Socrates Onassis. And it begins, as the best stories do, with fire. Smyrna was one of those cities that felt eternal. Perched on the Aegean coast of what is now Turkey, it had been Greek for 3,000 years. Its harbour was magnificent, a crescent of blue water lined with grand stone buildings, cafes, and trading houses. In the early 20th century, it was home to a thriving community of Greek merchants, Jewish traders, Armenian artisans, and Ottoman families who had lived side by side for generations. It smelled of salt water and tobacco and money. Aristotle Onassis was born there on January 15, 1906. His father, Socrates Onassis, was a successful tobacco merchant, not fabulously rich, but comfortable and respected. The kind of man who owned a house with a courtyard and gave his children good shoes. His mother, Penelope, died when Aristotle was just 6 years old, in 1912, following surgery. It was his first encounter with loss. It would not be his last. Young Aristotle was a difficult student. Bright, observant, quick with numbers, but allergic to discipline. He got suspended from school. He argued with teachers. His father despaired of him. But there was something in the boy that his grades could not measure, an almost preternatural ability to read people, to figure out what they wanted, to find the angle in any situation. He was already a trader, even as a child. He just had not found his market yet. The world around him was shifting in ways that would soon become catastrophic. The First World War had reshuffled the empires of Europe and the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was collapsing. Greece had fought and won territory. Then it overreached. The Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922 ended in disaster for the Greek side, and the consequences for Greek communities inside Turkey were devastating. In September 1922, the Turkish army marched into Smyrna. What followed became known as the Great Catastrophe. The city's Greek and Armenian quarters were set ablaze. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of civilians died in the fire and its aftermath. The harbour filled with refugees. People waded into the water to escape the flames. Allied warships stood offshore and did almost nothing. Aristotle Onassis was 16 years old. He watched the city of his birth burn from the bridge of a ship. 4 of his uncles, an aunt, and a cousin were burned to death inside a church where hundreds of Christians had sought shelter. The family's property, all of it, was gone. His father was arrested by Turkish authorities and held for months before eventually being released. The family that remained scattered toward Athens, among hundreds of thousands of Greek refugees flooding into a country that was barely able to absorb them. It is hard to overstate what this moment meant. Onassis had not merely lost his home, he had lost his country. He was now stateless, a Greek from Turkey in a Greece that could not quite accommodate him. He arrived in Athens without money, without standing, without a clear future. He was a refugee, but he was also 16. And somewhere inside him, something had calcified. He would later say, almost offhandedly, that losing everything had been the most important thing that ever happened to him. Not because suffering is ennobling, it often isn't, but because once you have truly lost everything, you stop being afraid of losing things. And a man with nothing left to lose is a very dangerous man in business. In August 1923, just a year after the fire, Onassis boarded a ship for Argentina. He traveled on a Nansen passport, the document issued to stateless refugees by the League of Nations. He arrived in Buenos Aires on September 21, 1923, with roughly $60 and no contacts. He was 17 years old. Buenos Aires in the 1920s was a city of immigrants and ambition. Greeks, Italians, Spanish, and Eastern Europeans. Everyone had come to make something of themselves in the new world. Onassis took whatever work he could find. He carried bricks on construction sites. He washed dishes. He worked nights as a telephone operator for the British United River Plate Telephone Company and used the daytime hours, when the city was open for business, to teach himself the art of trading. He read contracts. He showed up to commercial docks and listened to conversations between merchants and captains. He absorbed everything. And he had a very specific pursuit in mind. Back in Smyrna, his father had been a tobacco merchant. Aristotle knew tobacco. He knew the leaf, the blending, the trade networks, and he noticed something about Argentina. The local cigarette market was unsophisticated. British and Turkish tobacco was available, but nobody was doing it well. Nobody was targeting the premium end of the market. So he started importing tobacco, Turkish leaf specifically, which he knew how to source and blend better than almost anyone in Buenos Aires. He started with small quantities, sold to local cigarette makers, then realized the real money was in making and selling the finished product himself. He launched 2 cigarette brands, Osman and Primeros. He did his own marketing. He called on shop owners personally, explained the product, charmed them into taking a chance on a young Greek nobody. He was fluent in Spanish within 2 years. He dressed carefully, even when he could not fully afford to. He understood that in every transaction, the buyer is not just buying the product. They are buying the person standing in front of them. It worked. Within a few years, Onassis was earning enough to open an import-export company. He expanded his tobacco trading into other commodities, developed supplier relationships across South America, and learned the mechanics of international trade from the ground up. By the age of 21, he had his first $1 million. Let that land for a moment. A stateless refugee who had arrived with $60 had become a millionaire in 4 years, in a country where he knew no one, in an industry he had taught himself from memory. In 1929, the Greek government appointed him their honorary consul in Buenos Aires, a remarkable recognition of a young man who had technically only been in the country for 6 years. It gave him legitimacy, it gave him a network, and it gave him a title, which, in the social world of South American commerce, opened doors that money alone could not. He accepted the appointment without false modesty. He understood what it represented. It was the world, for the first time, formally acknowledging that Aristotle Onassis had arrived. But here is the thing about Aristotle Onassis. He was never satisfied with what he had. He was always looking at the next horizon. And the next horizon, in the early 1930s, was the ocean. The Great Depression had devastated the global economy. Trade had collapsed. Shipping companies that had overextended during the boom years of the 1920s were now bankrupt, their fleets sitting idle in ports around the world. Ships that had once been worth a fortune were selling for fractions of their value. To almost everyone watching, this looked like a catastrophe. To Onassis, it looked like an opportunity. In 1933, he traveled to Canada. The Canadian Steamship Company had 2 cargo ships they needed to offload, each one 5,500 gross tons. The asking price was 3,775 British pounds per ship, for ships that, in better times, would have cost 10 times as much. Onassis bought them both. He named them the Onassis Penelope, after his mother, and the Onassis Socrates, after his father. It was a sentimental gesture from a man who presented himself as purely pragmatic. He set them to work on Atlantic trade routes and watched the money come in. What he understood that his competitors did not was simple. The Depression would not last forever. It never did. When the global economy recovered, the demand for shipping would explode, and the people who had bought ships at Depression-era prices would be positioned to make fortunes. He had seen it happen in tobacco. He was betting it would happen in steel and ocean water. He was right. Through the 1930s, Onassis kept buying. He expanded from cargo ships into oil tankers, a move that shocked the traditional Greek shipping community, which regarded tankers with suspicion. Oil was a messy, volatile cargo. The handling was complicated, but Onassis had done his arithmetic. The world was moving toward petroleum. Automobiles were multiplying. Industries were shifting from coal to oil. Whoever had the tankers would control the lifeblood of the modern economy. He was building his fleet ship by ship, deal by deal. He moved between Buenos Aires, New York, London, and Athens, staying in elegant hotels, wearing bespoke suits, projecting the image of a man who had already arrived even when he was still climbing. He once said, almost as a business principle, to be successful, keep looking tanned. Live in an elegant building even if you are in the cellar. Be seen in smart restaurants even if you only nurse one drink, and if you borrow, borrow big. He understood that in business, perception and reality feed each other. If people believe you are powerful, they treat you as powerful. And when people treat you as powerful, you become more powerful. By the late 1930s, Onassis had a growing fleet, a reputation in shipping circles, and an income that most men would have considered the end of the story. But the world was about to go to war, and war, for a shipping magnate with the right instincts, was about to become the most consequential test of his life. The Second World War should have destroyed him. Many Greek ship owners were ruined by it. Their vessels were sunk by U-boats, their trade routes severed, and their businesses bankrupted by the chaos of global conflict. Onassis, characteristically, navigated it differently. He registered his fleet under the Panamanian flag, a legal maneuver that gave his ships tax-free status and a degree of political neutrality. He made arrangements with the United States government to carry military equipment at reduced rates in exchange for preferential access to war surplus ships after the conflict ended. He was playing both sides of the chessboard simultaneously, which is a dangerous game, but a lucrative one if you are good enough at it. When the war ended in 1945, Onassis moved to buy war surplus ships from the United States government at bargain prices. The American shipping law technically prohibited non-citizens from purchasing American-flagged vessels. Onassis used intermediaries, shell companies, and complicated ownership structures to get around this. The arrangement was legally questionable, American authorities noticed. But in the chaos of the post-war world, Onassis's maneuvers went unchallenged for years. He used those ships to expand his tanker fleet dramatically. He commissioned new vessels, bigger, faster, more efficient than anything the industry had seen. He was one of the first owners to pioneer supertankers, vessels so large they could not even fit through the Suez Canal. He was thinking in decades, not quarters. The world was going to need more oil. He was going to be the man who moved it. And then came the deal that nearly broke everything. In January 1954, Onassis signed an agreement with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that was breathtaking in its ambition. The deal gave his company, Saudi Arabian Maritime Tankers Limited, which he called SATCO, a 30-year priority right to transport oil produced by Aramco, the Arabian American Oil Company. Aramco was a consortium of American oil giants, Standard Oil of California, Texaco, Standard Oil of New Jersey, and Socony Vacuum. The oil they were pulling out of the Saudi desert was among the most valuable commodity on earth, and Onassis had just inserted himself by contract between that oil and its customers. The American oil companies were furious. They had not been consulted. The State Department was alarmed. The CIA began monitoring the situation. According to documents later declassified, the United States government received presidential authorization to take, in their own words, all appropriate measures to ensure the Onassis contract never took effect. And it was not just the Saudi deal they were watching. Federal agents had already begun being seized Onassis's American flag ships in United States ports. The first vessel seized was the tanker Lake George, boarded at Wilmington, Delaware, on March 24, 1953. 16 more would follow. The Department of Justice alleged that Onassis had illegally purchased American vessels using front companies to circumvent federal shipping laws. The seizures were abrupt, highly publicized, and designed to send a message. Onassis faced the very real possibility of criminal prosecution in the United States. His American operations were in jeopardy. His reputation, which he had spent decades carefully constructing, was under assault. He was approaching 50 years old, one of the richest men in the world, and he was in serious trouble. He did what he always did when cornered. He negotiated. He hired lawyers. He fought through the courts and through back-channel diplomacy simultaneously. And in 1955, he reached a settlement with the United States government, paying approximately $7 million in fines and agreeing to surrender his American-registered vessels. The Saudi SATCO deal was ultimately cancelled under combined pressure from Aramco, the State Department, and the Saudi government itself. By conventional standards, this was a defeat. 17 ships gone, $7 million paid out. His most audacious business coup nullified. The narrative should have ended there. The man who flew too close to the sun burned and fell. But Onassis didn't see it that way. He once said, "The secret of business is to know something that nobody else knows." And what Onassis knew in 1955 was something that nobody else seemed to have noticed yet. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain, France, and Israel responded with military force. The canal was closed. Suddenly, all the oil tankers that normally moved through that narrow waterway had to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding thousands of miles to every journey. The world needed ships desperately. Big ships, long-haul ships, ships that could handle the distance. Onassis had those ships. His supertankers, the ones too large to use the Suez Canal anyway, were now perfectly positioned. He was charging over $60 per ton of cargo. Each voyage generated profits of more than $2 million. While his rivals scrambled to adapt, he simply collected. The Suez Crisis was the inflection point. What had looked like a series of setbacks, the ship seizures, the failed Saudi deal, the government pressure, had left him holding exactly the right assets at exactly the right moment. His supertankers were not a consolation prize. They were the future of the industry, and they were his. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, the empire expanded at a rate that seemed almost impossible. He commissioned new supertankers on a rolling basis, each one larger and more efficient than the last. He developed a system of long-term charter agreements, locking in oil companies as clients for 10 and 15-year contracts before the ships were even built. He was financing construction with future revenues, which meant he was building wealth with other people's money, while the holes were still being welded. Bankers who had once been skeptical found themselves competing for his business. At the height of his power, Onassis was ordering vessels that dwarfed anything the industry had previously imagined. His flagship supertanker, the Olympic Bravery, launched in the early 1970s, was over 300 meters long and could carry more than 200,000 tons of crude oil in a single voyage. To put that in perspective, that is enough oil to fill roughly 130 Olympic swimming pools. He had turned the economics of shipping upside down. The larger the ship, the lower the cost per barrel transported. He had figured this out in 1933, when he bought his first 2 vessels during the Depression. He was simply executing the same insight at an ever larger scale. He established a presence in Monaco, where he bought a controlling stake in the Société des Bains de Mer, the company that effectively owned the casino, the Hôtel de Paris, and much of the infrastructure of the Principality. He was no longer just a shipping magnate. He was a sovereign of a kind, a private citizen who owned a piece of an actual country. In 1957, he made a move that his great rival, Stavros Niarchos, had also desperately wanted. He outbid Niarchos to acquire Olympic Airways, the national airline of Greece. The Greek government needed an operator for its flagging national carrier. Onassis saw it not purely as a business but as a statement, proof that he was not merely wealthy, but institutionally significant. A man with an airline is a different kind of man. The rivalry with Niarchos had been running for years and ran through everything. Both men had married into the Livanos family. Onassis married Tina Livanos. In 1946, the daughter of one of the most prominent Greek shipping dynasties, Niarchos married her older sister Eugenia. They were brothers-in-law and enemies simultaneously. Their competition extended from shipping contracts to private islands to the caliber of dinner guests on their respective yachts. They undercut each other on charter rates. They bid against each other for vessels at maritime auctions. They tracked each other's fleet movements. When Onassis bought the island of Skorpios in the Ionian Sea in 1963 and rebuilt it into a private paradise of whitewashed villas, bougainvillea and olive groves, Niarchos developed his own island, Spetsopoula. The contest never really ended. It just changed shape. And in the shipping markets, where information is leverage, having an enemy as well connected as Stavros, Niarchos kept Onassis sharper than any consultant could have. But Onassis was winning the larger game. By the early 1960s, his fleet numbered more than 70 vessels, including over 40 supertankers. He was operating on virtually every major oil trade route in the world. His net worth was somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, equivalent to several billion in today's terms. Winston Churchill sailed on his yacht, the Christina, a converted Canadian frigate that Onassis had refitted at enormous expense. The Christina's features were legendary: marble bathrooms with gold-plated fixtures, a mosaic dance floor that could be raised hydraulically to convert the pool into a ballroom, a bar whose stools were upholstered in the scrota of sperm whales, and a library lined with rare books and antiquities. Churchill came aboard multiple times in his final years. He was old and frail and barely spoke, but he would sit on the deck in the Aegean sun and let the world be quiet for a while. Onassis treated him with a reverence that surprised people, who assumed the shipping magnate had no heroes. He was also conducting the great love affair of his life. Maria Callas, the most celebrated soprano of the 20th century, a woman of volcanic talent and fierce intelligence, had met Onassis at a party in Venice in 1957. Both were married to other people. Neither particularly cared. By 1959, they were together, and the world couldn't look away. She was art. He was money. Together, they were something the 20th century hadn't quite seen before. Two genuinely extraordinary people who somehow made each other more extraordinary. She performed. He watched from the wings. He said she was the only person who ever made him feel that what he did with his life was not enough. They would be together, on and off, for most of the rest of his life. And then, in 1968, he did something that stunned Callas, stunned the world, and became one of the most analyzed decisions in the history of fame. He married Jacqueline Kennedy. Jackie was arguably the most famous woman on Earth, the widow of the assassinated American president, a figure of almost mythological grief and grace. She was also, in 1968, exhausted by her life in America, afraid for her children after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and looking for something that felt like safety. Onassis offered her wealth so absolute it felt like a fortress. He offered her his world, private islands, private planes, and the kind of removal from ordinary life that only the very rich can purchase. Callas learned of the wedding 3 weeks before it happened. She was devastated. Onassis resumed visiting her in Paris shortly after the ceremony, 3 or 4 times a week, according to those who knew them. Jackie was reportedly aware and took the advice of Onassis' sister Artemis, who told her simply, "Don't pay attention. In Greece, that's what usually happens." The marriage was not a happy one. The two were too different, too famous, too much of the time apart. And then, in January 1973, something happened that undid Aristotle Onassis in a way that no government seizure, no legal battle, no business defeat ever had. His son Alexander crashed a plane. Alexander Onassis was 24 years old, the heir to everything his father had built, the person Aristotle had said was the whole point of all of it. On January 23, 1973, Alexander was overseeing pilot training at Hellinikon Airport in Athens when his Piaggio amphibious aircraft went down on takeoff. He suffered catastrophic brain injuries. Aristotle flew to Athens immediately, brought specialists from across Europe and America, and refused to accept what the doctors were telling him. For 33 days, he sat at his son's bedside and bargained with a world that had stopped bargaining back. Alexander died on January 23, 1973. He never regained consciousness. People who knew Onassis said he was never the same after that morning. The man who had survived the burning of Smyrna, who had rebuilt himself from nothing in a foreign country, who had outmaneuvered oil companies and the full legal apparatus of the United States, that man did not know what to do with grief this total. He had always been able to act. He had always been able to find the angle, make the deal, turn the loss into a move. Alexander's death offered no angle. It just hurt. He began to withdraw. His health deteriorated rapidly. He developed myasthenia gravis, a muscle-weakening disease that required him to tape his eyelids open to see. He lost weight. His famous energy faded. He terminated his contract with the Greek government to operate Olympic Airways in late 1974, a concession that felt, to those watching, like a man releasing something he no longer had the strength to hold. He died in Paris on March 15, 1975. He was 69 years old. The official cause was listed as respiratory failure. Those who loved him said it was something simpler than that. He had lost the thing that made him want to get up in the morning. But here is what Aristotle Onassis left behind, and why it matters. In his will, he directed that half of his estate, valued at more than $500 million, be used to create the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation, named for the son he had not been able to save. Today, that foundation funds scholarships for Greek students studying around the world, supports the arts, and runs the Onassis Cultural Center in Athens, which has become one of the most respected contemporary arts institutions in Europe. The boy from Smyrna who never finished school built one of the great cultural endowments of the modern era. He left behind a model of thinking about risk that business strategists still study. He bought shipping capacity at the bottom of cycles, in the Great Depression, in the aftermath of World War II, in the chaos following the Suez crisis, and held through the recoveries. He understood, decades before it became doctrine, that the greatest opportunities appear precisely when everyone else is retreating. He understood that pessimism is not wisdom. It is, for those with the courage to see clearly, an invitation. He pioneered the supertanker, not because he liked large things, but because he had done the mathematics. A ship twice the size does not cost twice as much to operate, but can carry far more than twice the cargo at a fraction of the per-ton cost. He was thinking in efficiencies and scale at a time when most of his competitors were thinking about individual voyages, and he left behind a story. The story of a 16-year-old standing on a ship's bridge watching his city burn, arriving in Argentina with a refugee's travel document and $60, becoming a millionaire at 21, surviving a full confrontation with the United States government, losing his son, and still finding the will to keep going until he didn't. There is a quote of his that has stayed with people who came after him. After a certain point, money is meaningless. It ceases to be the goal. The game is what counts. The man who said that had started with nothing. He had rebuilt himself twice, in 2 different countries, under 2 different sets of impossible circumstances. He had built, through force of will and intelligence and nerve, one of the largest private shipping empires in human history. He saw the ocean as a highway when everyone else saw it as a barrier. He bet everything on that vision more than once, against more than one government, in more than one era. And the world's fuel moves, its factories run, its economies breathe, in no small part because of what a poor Greek boy from Smyrna dared to imagine. That is a legacy worth remembering.